The Depp Heard case is the current talk of the digital town right now, and while there are all kinds of interesting points of discussion, the one I really want to talk about today is this statement right here.
You can please tell people that it was a fair fight and see what the jury and judge think. Tell the world, Johnny. Tell them, Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp, man, I'm a victim too of domestic violence, and yes. It's a fair fight. And see how many people believe or side with you.
It's the part that stuck with me the most because I've heard that before. So sit back, relax, and let me tell y'all a story and give you a bit of insight into what happens when men find themselves on the receiving end of domestic abuse. During what I'm going to call my dating career, I became extremely familiar with every type of toxic personality and tactic known to civilization. My first adult relationship was with a woman who constantly threatened to hit me, thinking that the threat of violence alone would make me stop standing up for myself. It didn't. I remember being called controlling by another ex when I told her that constantly trying to cheat on me wasn't exactly conducive to a stable relationship. Classic gaslighting. Another woman I was with couldn't grasp what disabled meant and spent the entire 5 days I knew her, belittling me for not being man enough to learn how to repair motorcycles. For the record, I have never owned nor expressed any interest at all in motorcycles. Whatever. But all of those things were pretty minor compared to the last ex I had before meeting my wife. If those previous relationships were toxic, this one was downright abusive. It started off the same way that pretty much all of my relationships have, on a dating site where she portrayed herself as a decent enough human being to where I thought I would actually want to get to know her. And so we met up in fairly short order. Things went pretty well at first, and of course that's usually the case for situations like this. People tend to put their best foot forward and then start kicking you with it later. I fell for her pretty quick, if I'm to be honest here, and I can't help but feel like the world would be a better place if terrible people were forced to wear a sign declaring themselves as such at all times. But pretty early on into the relationship, she decided it was time to start drinking, and that's when things started to go south. I was typing this out and trying to remember what our first argument was about. Drew a blank. Which is odd, not because I feel like I should remember the first argument she and I were ever in, but because the more I sat there thinking about it, the more I realized I don't remember what damn near any of our arguments were actually about. In the back of my mind, I already knew why that was the case, and it can be summed up by saying they weren't about anything. I said the wrong thing to her in the wrong tone, and even though she could never articulate what it was I actually said or what tone I actually had, it was time to fight about it. I made the traditional excuses, as one does when they're faced with the grim realization they've entered into a toxic relationship. She was drunk, after all, and this was the first time I'd ever witnessed her drunk. I didn't know that drunk was a perpetual state for this woman yet. And so the next day I confronted her about the shenanigans of the night before, and she apologized. And I was dumb enough to believe it. Another couple of weeks passed in this relationship, and all was well. She even drank around me a few more times, and all was well. It's at this point, though, where even though you haven't completely forgotten about the night things got a little more trashy than what you'd normally be willing to tolerate, you've managed to convince yourself that maybe it was just a fluke instead of an intrinsic part of their personality. On this grand scale of time, though, I didn't have to wait long to be proven wrong there. Naturally, I didn't have any idea what that argument was about either, and I don't think recounting every single one of the many, many fights we had is going to do much for this tale, because there were a lot of them, and they all followed along the same track of how dare I do this thing that I'm pretty sure happened in some alternate universe where whiskey has completely replaced human blood. It should be enough for me to say that I was getting a bit tired of all this. I'm not generally a pushover. I avoid confrontation when possible, sure, but if you're bringing it to me on a consistent basis, then defending myself has never been something I've shied away from doing. The problem with the abusive relationships I've been in, though, is that the second you stand up for yourself, it's like a challenge to them. Suddenly, the stakes need to be upped in the most destructive way possible. Like they realize that you're about to walk and beating you down is going to shatter your confidence and get you to stay. It works on a lot of people. But I'm on my way out, and that night I tell her as much. We'd just gotten out of a bar, and I was taking her home when the millionth fight breaks out. She's smashed, and she's pissed off that I'm not giving her the attention she deserves while telling me that I'll never do any better than her. Which fell on deaf ears because I'd already done better than her before. Sure, those relationships didn't work out, but I had an ex I was still friends with after all that had managed to go years without pulling any of the jackassery that was going on here on an almost nightly basis. But anyway, we get to her place and I pull in the parking lot and proceed to tell her bye. But she doesn't get out. She just keeps yelling at me. I tell her directly that she needs to get out of my vehicle, and she decides it's the perfect time to remember this gift I got her a few weeks prior. Said gift was still sitting in my car because she was too much of a drunken mess to ever remember to take it inside with her, but it's some fiber optic thingamajig that's sitting in the back. And she proceeds to grab it, rips out the power cord, and proceeds to whip me with it a few times. And after the initial shock of what the hell is this chick doing, I remember that I've actually studied martial arts for decades at this point, and the entire premise of every martial art ever invented is that there is such thing as not just sitting there and letting someone do that to you. So I did the sensible thing and I grabbed the damn cord out of her hand and threw it out the window. At this point, I'm telling her that she needs to get out before I call the cops. And that's when this familiar sound comes out of her mouth.
It's a fair fight. It sees how many people believe or side with you.
She said that as she hits me in the arm a few times, and the thing is, I instantly knew that she was right. I knew this because I know several other guys who've been in this exact type of situation and how it worked out for them when the cops showed up. Ladies, it might take a leap of faith for you to accept this as a legit possibility, but a lot of guys will tell you that me explaining this to you here will take longer than us playing out how this situation is going to go in our minds. The cop shows up, and all a woman has to say is, "He hit me." And nothing I say is going to matter from that point on. It won't matter that it's just the word of an obviously drunk woman who literally just peed in my car. And yes, she most certainly did pee in my car. Wasn't even the first time. More than likely, no charges are going to stick, but I will be going to jail that night. And you especially don't want that to happen on a weekend. You might be sitting in that cell for a few days until a judge releases you for lack of evidence. Why are cops more likely to believe a drunk woman who can barely string two sentences together over a guy? For the same reason most of our society is. For more on that, let's go back to Johnny and remember how his career was completely destroyed by accusation alone. If you are one of the many people who decide that he was guilty just because Amber Heard said he was, or one of the people who still believes it, even after we got audio of her admitting that she was the abuser, you can feel free to let us all know why in the comments section. End result is that I basically just had to sit there doing my best to de-escalate the situation until I finally promised that I would come over the next day. She made me promise, knowing full well that I literally never break promises. Seriously, I'm barely capable of it. I have a touch of OCD, and I mean that in the clinical sense. This is why I seldom make promises, because even the thought of not being able to keep them through no fault of my own gives me panic attacks. So she's got me, and she knows it. And so she was free to slither her way back inside, returning to her coffin and sleep the good victory sleep or whatever it is sociopaths do. I show up the next day just as I said I would, and she's apologetic. I don't really care. But she says she's going to quit drinking, and while I don't really believe her, I have it in my head that maybe she will, and I decided to stick around to find out. She's done a pretty decent job at this point of getting inside my head to where I'm tying her mental well-being into somehow being my responsibility. And so a week later, I got us a hotel room, and the drinking and fighting started right up again. I put up with that for exactly 2 seconds and told her that we were over. She tells me we should have this conversation in the morning when she's sober. And I was a bit drunk myself and had no business driving home that night anyway, so fair enough. Which brings me to the day before my 28th birthday. We wake up, and I basically have to do a recap of the night before. She says, "Let's just see how your birthday goes," and I'm sitting there just, sure thing. We each went out with separate people that night, but we made plans to hook back up later at the same bar. Midnight rolls around, and I'm at bar number 3 of the night. I was pacing myself, mind you, and I still haven't heard from her. I text, no reply. I texted one of our mutual friends who tells me that she's been with another guy all day, which didn't really surprise me. I asked him where they were at that point, and he says he doesn't know. So I did what any reasonable person would do, and I drove back to my hotel room. It might be important to note that I did remember the way our last argument started. It was over the hotel, specifically the bill. See, it was one of those rent by the week deals, and I kicked out the money for the first week. We had the agreement that I would cover the first and she would cover the second week. But the second week was going to be 2 days from then, and she'd blown every dime she'd made that month on booze. So somehow it was my fault that we only had a couple of days left there. The point I'm wanting to make here, though, is that this was actually my room. It was in my name, and I was the only person who kicked up any money for it. But she had the key card to open the door. I got there, and I see the car of the guy she's been with. I knew the dude. He was constantly talking about me behind my back because he wanted to get in her pants, and I guess tonight, which was officially my birthday at this point, was his lucky night. I knock on the door, and there's no answer. I know they're both in there because the curtain in the window is wide open, the TV's on, and I see them both in the bed I paid for. They seem to be passed out, though, so I knock louder. I see them move, but no one's making any effort to get up and open said door. I've got things in this hotel room, belongings of mine that I want back, and I'm not leaving until I get them. So I knock louder, practically banging on the door at this point, most definitely pissing off everyone else in that place, but they're still not moving. After about 15 minutes of that, I simply yell that if the door doesn't open, I'm going to be slashing some tires. Magically, the door opens right up mere seconds later. I didn't know those were magic words, but lesson learned. It's the Wicked Witch, and she immediately starts yelling at me like I'm the unreasonable person here, which you can make the argument that maybe I should be threatening to slash tires, but in all honesty, the guy was a complete piece of shit with a long track record of abusing women himself, so I stand by my decision. But he's not even moving throughout everything that's happening so far. He's just laying there in his boxers, face down on the bed I paid for. Part of me initially was thinking I paid for this place. They should be getting the hell out now. But I quickly came to the decision that I was sober enough to just drive home and permanently close this chapter of my life, and that's what I set out to do. Now, I have one rule in a relationship, one thing that I absolutely will not put up with under any circumstances: cheating. If I get confirmation the woman I'm involved with has cheated on me, that's it. There's no arguing, there's no fighting, we're just done. So she's screaming all manner of things at me, and I'm just getting my stuff together and setting them outside the front door as I go, because I'm done. I have literally nothing left to say to you. At one point, though, she gets right up in my face with her screaming, and I tell her that she might want to think about what she's about to do. She says something dumb to me that I don't remember, and I decide to make a dig that she was acting just like her mother, knowing that it would piss her off, but hoping that it would set in because it's the most true thing I've ever said in my life. And she does what any normal sober person would do and decides that this is the moment she's going to take a swing at me. I'd already anticipated that she would do so, and I really didn't even have to think about it as my hand went up and met hers. I brushed her hand away with as little force as I could when she spins to the ground, clutching her face, screaming at the top of her lungs that I hit her. In case you haven't been paying attention up to this point, I didn't hit her at all, let alone in the face. But there she is, on the ground, claiming that I did, and the guy who's in my bed gets up and starts trying to push me out the door. I'm not a violent person, but I really didn't like this guy and thought very hard in the past about kicking his ass. And now he has his hands on me. But I'm not done. I know that from the sheer amount of noise that's been coming out of this place for the last 20 or so minutes, the cops are undoubtedly on their way. So I tell him that he should definitely be taking his hands off me, and he says that I shouldn't be hitting her, and naturally, I reply that I didn't. And even more birthday magic happens at this point when she gets up and she says, wait for it, then what's this mark on my face? You see what I just did there? You see what just happened? Because even old dude saw it and backed off immediately. In case you missed it, she was clutching one side of her face the entire time she was down, and when she got up, she pointed at the other. Even more to the point, there was no mark to speak of on either side. Old dude goes and sits back down, undoubtedly contemplating his life choices up to this point, especially since she has put him in a position of either getting assault charges or getting his ass kicked that night over a lie. And like 2 seconds later, the cops show up. They ask what's going on. She's yelling at them that I need to get out. She fails to make any claims about me hitting her, though, so probably saved me from a weekend in jail right there. But the cops can tell she's drunk and irate, so they ask whose name the hotel was in, and I tell them, well, it's mine, but I'm just getting my stuff and getting the hell out. That's all I ever wanted to do in the first place. And so, that night ends with them actually helping me carry my stuff down to my car. I drove home, and that was the end of that night. But she hit me up a few days later, begging me for a ride to work, which I had no intention of giving her, which does suggest that abusive people never see themselves as abusers. They really can't process how you could finally have enough of them and their drama or have the self-esteem to say goodbye to the whole situation. She even tried to repeat the lie that I hit her, saying that, well, there was a witness, when there absolutely was not. One thing that stuck with me, though, is that through all of this, and the time after, she never lost a single friend. All of the mutual friends we had knew what was going on, and I was the one who was out. Good riddance. I mean, I've never been the type to care about winning popularity contests, so it's just kind of messed up that there we were in 2012, and a guy getting perpetually abused for months doesn't seem to move anyone. She died a few years after I broke up with her, and I guess a lifetime of alcohol abuse and rage tends to cut down your life expectancy. It might seem a bit cold of me to put it like that, but what can I say? The climate for someone tends to get a bit nippy after a situation like that. So, closing this out, in the last few weeks, as the evidence is mounted against Amber Heard, and we know now that 100% she was an abuser, and I still see comments on social media trying to take away from that fact by saying, so what? Women get abused more. I have to say, please fuck off. Because however statistically correct that statement may be, you're not exactly on the right side of history by turning someone's objectively terrible story into a pissing contest and minimizing what other people go through. I don't know if my situation would have turned out differently if I had had any kind of support whatsoever, but wouldn't it be nice if men who deal with abuse had the opportunity to find out? Right now, comment sections all over the internet are full of people pointing out what Johnny did wrong, that he yelled or he was too aggressive. But society already reached the point long ago where most rational people decide that a woman yelling does not ever, under any circumstances, give a man the right to hit her. When that line gets crossed by a man, everyone who isn't an abusive sack of crap themselves expresses in unison that the woman in this situation is clearly the victim. And I think that most women tend to have that same sentiment when the opposite is true as well. But there is still a hurdle that needs to be jumped over, and how acceptable it really is in the year 2022 for people to dissect everything an abuse victim did wrong in his life when said victim is a man. And most certainly a hurdle to jump over when it comes to believing a man could be a victim in the first place. Recent history suggests that we're still not at a point where a man can be vulnerable, where we don't believe that just because I could beat a woman doesn't mean that I ever would, regardless of the fact that I've made it 37 years thus far without ever having done so. It also suggests that even if the choice is made to resort to violence as an act of self-defense, and I have the recordings to prove it, I will still be the one being picked apart in the court of law and the court of public opinion. So, thanks for watching. I really hope that one day we reach a point where acknowledging that bad things happening to one group of people takes nothing away from another group. I didn't make this video so people could argue about who has it worse. I don't care who has it worse. Misery isn't a points game. All I've heard since reaching adulthood is that intelligent, mature people can focus on more than one thing at a time, and it's probably time we start actually doing that. The chances are that we as a people will never eradicate domestic violence, but we can eliminate the toxic preconceived notions we have about it. Until next time.